For anyone who doesn't know, this is Martin Moscrop, the star of a certain way show. We said we'd have a chat about the time in your early years when you went to New York.
Yeah. Yeah, well, our first time in New York was in September 1980. To start with, we all had full-time day jobs, and Tony Wilson had been managing us for maybe about a year, and he called a meeting, and he said basically, how would you like to record your first album in New York? So we all said, yeah. And he said, you'd have to leave, probably have to leave your jobs if you couldn't get enough time off, because we were going there for 3 weeks. So we all thought, well, yeah, so we could leave our jobs.
What was your job?
I was an apprentice electrician
Yeah.
at Merleys Blackstone in Hazel Grove in Stockport, which was part of the Hawker Siddeley company, and they made massive diesel engines that drove tugboats, generated electricity, drove ships, all that sort of thing. And I was a maintenance and test electrician there. Yeah, I mean, it was really good, the apprenticeship. I was one of 20 apprentices in my year, and I came runner-up apprentice of the year because some bastard beat me. He was slightly better than me. But Mike Pickering was an apprentice there. He was 2 years above me, yeah.
So did you work with each other?
Well, we didn't know each other at the time, yeah, but we worked in the same factory. Yeah.
Wow. When I did the video of Leroy, he's an engineer, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, Leroy, funnily enough, used to be ACR's driver.
Did he?
And he drove us around Europe, and I only found out about 40 years later that he didn't have a driving license. So he was a driver, a professional driver without a driving license. So Tony Wilson convinced us to go and record an album in New York because he thought that with the type of music we were listening to, which was like jazz and funk and all that sort of thing, he thought that it'd be great for our inspiration and influences. And unfortunately, we recorded that album, it was 2 each. We recorded it with Martin Hannett, and Martin Hannett wiped all of that sort of the jazz and the funk and everything out of it. It sounded quite gothic, the album. But the experience in New York in 1980 really inspired the next album, which was Sextet, which we produced ourselves.
Yeah.
So in Sextet and the album after that, we released 2 albums in 1 year, Sextet and I'd Like to See You Again. They were the result of that very first and second trip to New York, because we went to New York in 1980, 1981, 82, 83, and then again in 85. So the very first time, ACR were the first factory band to go there, and we did a few gigs, and then we recorded an album, and then New Order came over, and we did a couple of gigs with New Order. Tony hired a loft on Hudson Street in New York, which was in Tribeca, and he bought 6 mattresses, 6 sheets, 6 pillows. It was just an open plan loft with like a kitchen area at one end and a toilet and shower at the other, and us all sleeping there. We stayed there for 3 weeks and did a few gigs, made the album, did a few more gigs, and then came home. That was in September 1980. And we had a great time there. The very first gig we played there was at a place called Hurrah, and ESG was supporting us.
Yeah.
And when we saw ESG the first time, we thought, wow, what the fuck's this? Because, you know, there were these girls from the Bronx, and they sounded so soulful, but they couldn't play, you know, and soul music has always relied on good players.
Yeah.
So it was really strange hearing soul music played by people who couldn't really play, but it had soul, you know, because music having soul is really difficult to do unless you're a good musician.
Yeah.
But they had it, you know.
Yeah.
And Tony was friends with Ed Bailman, who run 99 Records, and he managed them. Was it Ed Bailman? I think so. He managed ESG. And we actually finished our album early, a couple of days early, and because we liked ESG so much, we mentioned to Tony getting ESG in the studio, and ESG used the last 2 days of our studio time and recorded that EP with Martin Hannett, the EP that was on Factory, really famous EP. So yeah, it was a real eye-opener. We played Hurrahs. Then the thing is, in New York, you could do 3 gigs, three concurrent consecutive nights, all in different venues, you know, and you'd get an audience at each one. And the following night after Hurrahs, we played at a venue called Tier 3 that was only open for 1 year. And it was called Tier 3 because it was on 3 levels, 2 mezzanines overlooking the ground floor, and it was tiny, and the audience was right on top of you. And it mentions us in the Beastie Boys book.
Oh, wow.
So the Beastie Boys must have been about 14 or 15 when they went to Tier 3. It's that book. The Beastie Boys book, and they were at Tier 3 at our very first gig.
So they went to see you?
Yeah. And they also mention in the book the early inspiration was Do the Do by a certain ratio.
Was it?
Yeah. So there's another person who was at that gig. He's called Matt Dike, who I made friends with, and he was only 17 at the time. And he went on to start the Delicious Vinyl label, which was a massive hip-hop label in America, next to Def Jam. Probably Def Jam and Delicious Vinyl were the 2 most successful hip-hop labels in the 80s. He had the biggest worldwide hit with Tone Loc's Wild Thing, and he also produced Young MC Know How, and he actually plays that killer bass line on the Young MC Know How. And he also produced Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys. He produced lots of records on his own label. But Matt, we met Matt in New York, and he used to just hang about with us every day. And he just started playing bass, so he used to get Jez to teach him all the ACR bass lines, and that was his learning thing, was learning ACR bass lines. And he went on to play one of the most famous bass lines ever in the world, which is the Young MC track, which is based, because in those days sampling was still legal, so the whole tune's based around that shaft sample, but the real deal in the tune is his bass line. So Matt Dike, we met there, and he went on to be Jean-Michel Basquiat's studio assistant for years. So he worked closely with him. He came to, we lived in Hume at the time, and about a year after, he came to stay with me and Tony, who I lived with in Hume, and we had mushrooms on the very first night he got there, and because he was from New
Take
York.
you mean magic mushrooms.
Yeah. Because he was American, obviously he was very loud and everything. But when me and Tony used to take mushrooms, we either used to watch really mad TV programs like Bilko. We used to watch tripping. Bilko tripping's great.
If you get the giggles.
Yeah. Or we used to listen to tunes. We had a really good sound system in the living room. We just used to play tunes really loud and pin ourselves to the back wall listening to them. But Matt was just, every tune we played, he was talking over it, and it sort of sent us into a bad trip. And that was the last time I saw Matt. And I saw Tony Wilson in the early 2000s at South by Southwest. And he said, oh, I met your mate Matt the other week. He said, he's got really long hair, he's a recluse now. So the Delicious vinyl label only lasted a few years before Matt left. I think his partner pushed him out because he'd become addicted to heroin and he wasn't functioning properly. He wasn't putting what he had been doing into the label, and he became a bit of a recluse. But that's someone interesting that we met in New York the first time. I think we went to a party and the Rolling Stones were at the party.
Oh wow, did you meet him?
Yeah. And we tried to get hold of Cindy Ecstasy to get some ecstasy, and she didn't have any ecstasy, but she had some THC capsules.
What's that?
THC is like the chemical in cannabis that gets you really stoned.
Right, yeah.
So it was like chemical
THC.
Yeah. And we took, she said, whatever you do, only take half a tablet each, half a capsule. We thought, fuck it, let's have one each. And I can remember trying to work out how to walk and I could feel my brain sending a signal to my right leg to move that forward and then to my left leg. And once I'd sussed out this signalling to my limbs, then I learned how to walk, you know. But we went to this party where the Rolling Stones were there. That was just, we were tripping on the THC, which was quite good fun.
I never heard of that. When did Ecstasy come out then? What year was that?
It was in America in the very early 80s.
Was it?
Yeah. There's like I said, it was someone called Cindy who used to ring up and she used to deliver it. Yeah. So yeah, New York had it way back then. America had it way back then. It was just seen as an alternative to either acid, mushrooms, THC, like I said. You could get anything in New York, really. Yeah. And I suppose at the time, in 1980 and stuff, we couldn't really afford to buy coke. We did coke once we played in Boston, and after the gig, it was our first time we'd had coke. And after the gig, Tony Wilson came into the dressing room and he said, "That's the last fucking time you ever take coke at a gig. That gig was really shit." So lots of experiences in New York. Which, like I said, we went there 1980, 81, 82. I think it was 82 or 83 was the gig at the Danceteria with Madonna. The thing about the connection with Manchester and New York was through Tony and Rob knowing Ruth Polsky. And Ruth Polsky was quite a big promoter in New York at the time, and eventually became a big promoter in the States, who, you know, she just really liked the post-punk thing, especially what was coming out of Manchester. And yeah, she really helped spark off the whole Manchester New York connection, and the Manchester New York connection was quite important, really.
Yeah.
Both musically and culturally. I mean, the Hacienda wouldn't have existed if we had never gone to New York.
Yeah.
And the Hacienda was a result of going to all those clubs in New York, like the Danceteria, the Ritz, Hurrahs, and going to these amazing venues that had amazing sound systems and amazing lights and videographers. People, every gig you did would be videoed. There'd be things on screens, and it was just a different league to the UK at that time. Um, and that's where the idea the Hacienda came from, because you'd come back to Manchester, you'd land in Wythenshawe in the rain, and have to drive down the parkway to get home.
Yeah.
And think, what the fuck am I doing here? You know, in this depressing place after just being in New York for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did the Hacienda ever feel close to the New York clubs, or was it all?
Yeah, it was close. It was close in, I'd say, in size and in, you know, the idea of it. The thing that let the Hacienda down, obviously, was the sound.
Yeah.
And in New York, you would have never got away with having a club with bad sound.
Yeah.
Because people just wouldn't go. A lot of the bigger clubs in New York and the States as well would have central heating, air conditioning, you know. So if you're playing in September in New York, which is a really humid month, you know, you'd be in a club that was comfortable. Apart from if you played somewhere like Tier 3, which was a little dive, you know. Yeah, so it had a lot that we didn't actually have. I remember coming back and saying to friends, you know, because at the corner shop in Manchester, you could buy cans of Coke and stuff, but they'd just be on the shelf, they wouldn't be in a fridge.
Yeah.
And I remember telling everyone, all the drinks are in fridges. Like, wow. As if that was something, you know,
yeah,
new, which it was to us. And the fact that it was a 24-hour city as well was quite amazing.
Yeah. When I did a video with Man Paris, he said that, I didn't know Studio 54 was open every night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most clubs were, yeah. Yeah.
It was empty in the week, he said.
Hey, empty, yeah.
Empty in the week.
Well, like the Hacienda.
Yeah.
I mean, when the Hacienda first opened, a lot of the artists that played were from the States. So, because we'd been going over there and doing gigs there and seeing these artists from the States, they'd get them to come and play at the Hacienda. Yeah. You know, people like Trouble Funk, I can't remember, there was a lot of American acts. Madonna,
African Bambaataa, did they?
Yeah, African Bambaataa.
I love to have seen that. You saw them in New York, didn't you?
Yeah, we saw Africa Bambaataa at the Ritz, I think, and it was their first time playing outside of the Bronx. And they had break dancers, b-boys break dancing, and it's the first I think we'd seen break dancing in when we'd been to Central Park, but we'd never seen it in a venue before. And that was pretty good, seeing Africa Bambaataa. Yeah, the good thing about going in the early 80s was we were seeing the birth of the hip hop movement, you know. Yeah. Not only was hip hop taking off, it wasn't massive by any means. It was quite underground, but you could go to a jazz club one night. You could go and see a funk band the next night. You could go and see someone like, I don't know, Tuxedo Moon the night after. Yeah. Then you could go to a disco the night after. Yeah. You know, and there was just all these different types of music and different places to go and experience it. New York was, it was very, very run down, um, but culturally it was just so diverse and so rich, you know. But the city itself was quite, there was real no-go areas, there was a lot of poverty, but there was a hell of a lot of creativity, you know.
Yeah, well, it felt dangerous, didn't it, walking around there at times?
It did. I think it was the second or third time we went. Me and Jess went there. We, you know, when you get there, you wake up dead early the day after because you're still on UK time. We thought, right, we need to get some weed, and we walked to, I think it was Washington Square Park, and this guy said, "You guys want some weed?" And we went there. He said, "Yeah, try this joint out," and gave us a sample joint, which is what they always do, with really strong weed in. We thought, yeah, okay, give us $20 of that, and it came in a brown paper, little brown envelope. We got it back to the hotel, opened it, and it was just grass off the ground. So we thought, right, let's go back, and when we went back, we noticed that the guy had a gun, a holster sticking out of his jacket. Wow. So we just thought, right, let's leave it. But the Lower East Side, because we stayed in Tribeca, and Tribeca was, it was really run down, Tribeca. It's now the richest place in New York. It was just full of empty warehouses. And all those warehouses became lofts eventually, and got more and more expensive. But just near Tribeca on the east side was Alphabet City, which was a no-go area. Yeah. But we used to go there to school, and yeah, we even though we didn't dress like punks, you'd get groups of kids sat on what you call a stoop, which is the stairs going up to the apartment, and they'd shout, "Hey, punks!" and throw things at us. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of creativity in the Lower East Side because it was the only place where artists, musicians, that sort of thing could afford rent, you know, because it was so cheap. It's like any great city that becomes very creative, be it Berlin, Manchester, New York. That creativity always starts because of an affordable area. Yeah. Manchester, it was Hume in the very early 80s. Yeah. You could live in Hume rent-free, so, you know, it attracted a lot of creatives. Yeah. And I think without areas like that, you don't get that creativity. Yeah.
Do you know when you played the gigs in New York? I'm dead curious about Danceteria. Was that a club night you played at, or was it just a night in the week when they had bands on?
It's a good question. I think they had bands on all the time at Danceteria, but it was our end of tour rap party. We did 2 nights there, and the party was where Madonna supported us, and there was a buffet. Yeah. And yeah, so they treated the gig nights like club nights, you know, because a lot of the bands that played the gigs there would be like no wave bands, or, you know, post-punk bands with a dance element. That's the sort of music that they were into. Yeah. So even with a band on, it'd be like a club night with DJs and stuff. Yeah, it was just a really, really good venue with lots of cool people. It's amazing how the whole music scene and fashion scene developed within the first 3 years that we went to New York. A lot of it was down to hip hop as well.
Yeah.
Which changed the whole way that people listened to shared music and dressed and that sort of thing.
I remember there was a documentary in the 80s, Arena, and we all saw it in school, and everyone was into hip hop the next day. Everyone wanted to know about it. Took a few years, but I discovered spinning, and then you could buy imports from there.
Yeah.
Do you know, I've done a video recently with John Tracy, who was one of the original Hacienda DJs, and he talks about electro import from New York, and then later on it was Chicago music. So it came from the US, really, didn't it? A lot of
But even before, you know, like Northern Soul was American music. The Beatles and the Stones were really influenced by R&B from America.
Yeah.
We've always looked over to America for inspiration, and I would, if you think about the music that was about during the Second World War, like Glenn Miller and stuff, and how ahead of the time the Americans were with music, you know, and jazz and stuff. To me, it's all one thing, you know, that early jazz, bebop, jazz in the 60s, funk, house music. It's all one of the same thing. It's all as a result of, you know, music and creativity from the black community in America, or the not only the black community but the massive mixing pot that's over there. Just, you know, like Puerto Ricans, Brazilians, all mixing together and creating music that's unique, you know.
You know, Tintin messaged me last night, and he said that you did one of the first acid house tracks in England, and was it
ED 209? Yeah.
I didn't know that was you.
It was when it was released on. It was actually released on Dave Rowe's label, who's the Doves manager.
Yeah.
He was Subs manager and the Doves manager, and he had a label called Done for Money. He was also ACR's roadie.
Yeah.
He was our drum roadie, and he started this label, and he put out. He said he wanted to do like an acid house record, and me and Donald produced it in our studio, which was in the Boardwalk. We produced it with Dave, and he had this idea that he wanted to use all these samples from RoboCop.
Yeah.
Hence the name ED209. And we didn't
have... where it came from?
Yeah. So we didn't have the machine, we didn't have a 303 or an 808 or 909. So we had to make it with the S900 and the stuff that we had. So it's not like acid house in the way that it's using the stuff that acid house records were using at the time, but it's in spirit, it's like acid house. And I wouldn't say it's the first one. T-Coy released Karina in 87, which is, it's very housey. I wouldn't say it's acid house. But there was a lot of records released in 1988 when we released Acid to Ecstasy. But I think ours came out very early in 88. And then it ended up on the North compilation later on in 88, which Mike Pickering put together for Deconstruction Records.
Yeah, that was an amazing compilation.
Yeah, my favourite track on there is Annette Dream 17. Yeah. I never tire of that tune.
What happened to the singer?
I don't know. The singer was, wasn't it Mike Pickering's girlfriend's mum or something to do with, it was somebody's I think it was somebody's mum.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's a great tune, that.
Dave Aslan told me who it was on a message, and then I googled it and I couldn't find anything. And I thought, well, why can't I find anything? He's probably just done that song and then
Yeah.
just not done
It's
anything
mad,
else.
isn't it? How people can do something so good and then just disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, well, I think that's what makes things like that so unique, is because they didn't carry on.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a good thing.
Yeah.
That she only ever sung on that one record. But in 1988, there was just so much music came out of Manchester because of the whole acid house scene. And shortly after, well, as soon as we made ED 209, I bought an 808 drum machine, and there used to be a shop in Cheadle called Sounds Great, which was a bit of a heavy metal music shop, you know, that specialised in guitars and amps and all that sort of thing. And I went in there because I was buying a Mesa Boogie amp, and I said to Gary, who owned it, I said, you know the machine that they use in Acid House, the 303? He said, yeah, I've got one. And went up to the top shelf and pulled down this dusty box, right? He said, I've had it for bloody 8 years, well, however many years, I can't get rid of it. So I said, how much do you want for it? He said, 90 quid. And I bought it brand new, 303 in the box for 90 quid. It's worth a few grand now. But yeah, and then after that, I started making house tunes that sounded more authentic, you know. Went on to produce stuff. I produced other stuff on Dave Rowe's label. I produced Ashley and Jackson's first two singles, Solid Gold and The Sermon, that both did really well. And then I produced World of Twist, Interstellar.
Did you produce World of Twist?
I produced 3 of the tracks on the album, yeah.
What tracks?
Now you're asking.
Well, She's a Rainbow, is it? Or
no. Is it one called, not Bendy? Yeah, you got me there. But there's three on the album that I produced.
Yeah.
And I think I produced Interstellar's first single and some of the tracks on their first album. Yeah, we'll have to look that up and add that in.
I'll put it in the description.
Yeah.
So I always aim for around half an hour, and I've completely lost track of the time, like I always do. But I try and finish it with like a track that. So for you, I'd say think of a track that reminds you of when you were first starting out in New York, that era.
When we first started out in New York, so it was quite weird, really, because we were just, when we first started on Factory in 1979, we were listening to things like the Velvet Underground, Brian Eno, Kraftwerk, the sort of stuff that they played at Pips. But we'd very quickly got into like funk and jazz and that sort of thing. And I think in 1980, one of the bands that probably inspired me the most at the time was a band called Azimuth, who are from Brazil.
Yeah.
And you know, 1980, 81, 82 was like the sort of peak of Azimuth's career, and they released, they were quite prolific, like a certain ratio at that time, like releasing 1 or 2 albums a year.
Yeah.
And I think all their albums just totally inspired me. There was another artist called Ayeto Moreira and Flora Purin, who were both from Brazil,
Yeah.
but had moved to America and made it in America, but never really made it in Brazil.
Yeah.
But played like really good Brazilian music. So I think in 1980, we really got into percussion and Brazilian music, and I think it didn't really reflect that on the album that we recorded there, two each. But like I said before, the two albums after that were just full of percussion, you know.
Yeah.
And inspired by New York, really.
I mean, I'm gonna have to dig them out. So I'll just stop recording now. So yeah, thanks so much for doing this with me.
Okay.